Okay, I want to spend some time talking about the differences between equality and equity, particularly equality and equity in the classroom. So here's a way to illustrate it. If you do a Google search online, and it doesn't have to be Google, you can use Yahoo or any other search engine. On the terms equality versus equity, and then you go to images, a couple of images will show up. There's a comparison image where you have people of different heights, a really tall person, a medium person, and a short person, and they're at a ball field trying to look in over the outfield fence, and the little guy, of course, can't, and so in the next frame you have them all standing on a box. The trouble is, the little guy still can't see over the fence. But that's equality, because everyone is standing on the same box. The box is the same height, and everybody's getting the same shot. However, equity is a little bit different, because equity tries to take into account the fact that people don't always start from the same place. So equity tries to balance the fact that people are starting from a different place and getting them to the same goal. So the idea of equality is to treat everyone the same, whereas we can think of equity as getting everyone to the same place, in spite of whatever deficits they may have come into that classroom with. So I think that kind of sums up the differences between the two, and illustrates it pretty well. The next thing I would like to talk about is ethics in the classroom as it pertains to equality and equity. Now, this is, for some reason, sometimes kind of controversial. Equality has sort of been bantered around, and certain factions on the right think that equality looks one way, and factions on the left think equality looks another way, and they never really can come to any agreement about it. But in the classroom, it's very important, because particularly with older students, with the students that I teach at a community college, if I treated every student equally, it would be impossible for me to go out of my way to help certain students. It would probably harm certain students if I treated everyone equally. What I have to do is I have to take into account the individual students' particular needs, goals, and abilities. And that's tough to do at a community college, because at a community college, more than any other place in higher education, we're getting more and more and more students who are beginning college with greater and greater deficits. And that doesn't mean that they can't be successful in college. I've seen it over and over again. I myself am I'm a product of a community college, and I started with some pretty big deficits in community college. I was not a good student, and in fact, I was less than a good student, way less. And that was probably frustrating for some of my professors, but I had very kind, loving professors who brought me along and decided not to treat me like everyone else. Now, equity, and I was just reading something today in a book about faculty development for community college adjunct faculty, and they were commenting in this article that one of the problems with adjunct faculty is you get adjunct faculty right out of college or right out of a graduate program. They don't have a lot of teaching experience. And then they put them into community colleges, and community colleges use 70 to 80% of their faculty are 70 to 80% of their faculty are adjuncts, and as a result, 50% or more of their classes are taught by part-time faculty. And you have students who are coming into the class, into school with greater deficits, and then you have instructors who aren't really up to speed on the the art and science of effective teaching, and that has an impact. So when we think of equity, we need to think, particularly in a community college setting, we need to think of students as coming in with a variety of skill sets, and a teacher, the job of a teacher, in moving this along, because the job of every teacher is to teach their students. And to move them along through that process, you have to be able to treat them equitably. And equity is therefore a very important concept. Okay, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about best practices for equity in the classroom. I'm going to focus on equity. I could talk a little bit about equality, but I think equity is really the much more important concept, because if we treat every student the same way, we're going to miss a lot of things, and students who may not have to suffer may suffer because we grade them on the same the same continuum, or don't understand them in terms of how far they've come, whatever. And I know there's debates about that, and I'll leave that for another discussion another day. The English department at Chaffey College, there's a website that I found by Professor Watkins, and one of the things that they've decided to do is they have a little handout. Looks like it's a handout from a training, faculty development session or something. And the handout goes into, it has a bunch of bullet points about what are best practices for equity in the classroom. One of the first things it mentions is that community. We need to foster community. So create a community of learners within the classroom. Ask students to share information with each other, and ask them to rely on each other for this information they miss. Also, curriculum. Curriculum is a very important part of equity in the classroom. So some of the things it suggests are using at least 12-point font for handouts, particularly in a community college. This is from a Chaffey College. It looks like it's a community college type website, and they're focusing on ideas to make the information that you hand out to students accessible to all students. So students who maybe have some seeing difficulties or wear glasses, 12-point font is going to help out a lot more than an 8-point font, for example. Change activities often. They suggest that you change activities every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I know in my own teaching this is something I struggle with, particularly when I'm trying to explain some idea. I teach philosophy, so an idea like Plato's theory of the forms. I mean, there's a lot of research, a lot that's gone into 2,500 years of research into the theory of the forms. And if I'm trying to explain that in a 2-hour class period or an hour-long class period, there are certain things that I have to do. I have to do quite a bit of lecturing sometimes, but I try and even break those up by lecturing for a few minutes asking a question, try to ask a question that would be related to the topic and try to get students to think in that direction. So that's a strategy that you can use as well. Develop a template or outline for writing assignments, especially in lower level classes. And this is something I really have to work on. I've tried various different prompts for my papers, and maybe I should just give them a template and how that works. I'm glad I found this, so I can continue to try to become the better teacher that I've always wanted to be. So, encouraging students to stay in class. Now, at a community college, where most community colleges are very concerned about student retention, because the research says students start, and 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, many of them haven't received a degree. So you've got students who begin in, say, 2003. By 2009, only like 30 or 40%, and there's different studies that have numbers that are a little different, but around that. So they say that community colleges may have like a 30% retention rate. And college administrators don't like that, and it's important for instructors to be a part of the solution and treat students with equity. And one of the ways that they can do that, and I was thinking about this and talked about this earlier in the video, the idea that students don't come to the community college setting with at the same level of achievement, the same starting place. So you have some students who start with quite a deficit, and they have to do remedial English or remedial math. I myself had to do remedial math. I wasn't a math whiz, so I think it's an important thing to know that we as community college teachers have to be able to bring those people up to where they can graduate and be successful in their careers, and we can do it, because most students have the capability of doing really excellent work if they are, if the standards are put before them. Most students, I think, can and will, if they're inspired to do so, turn in excellent work. So that is some about the best practices. Okay, the last thing that I really want to talk about is a book that discusses equity. And the word equity is not used, but in Plato's Republic, in Book 1, the question is the question that's being discussed between Socrates and his interlocutor, Thrasymachus. They're discussing justice. Of course, Glaucon joins in, and others join in. Justice. What is justice? And we don't think a lot about that. I tell my students in my philosophy classes when we talk about justice, there's a whole field of endeavor known as criminal justice, where justice rarely happens. I say that because you can look at justice in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways to look at justice is how much equity is given to each individual party involved, from the family of the offender to the family of the victim, etc., etc. So justice is a pretty high bar. So part of the discussion in Book 1 of the Republic on justice is where Thrasymachus says, well, justice is paying back what is owed, what you owe somebody. And Socrates asks, he says, okay, paying back what you owe somebody. Well, that sounds nice, but if someone loans you their weapons or has you keep their weapons for them for a period of time, they return to you and they're obviously insane, should you give them the weapons back? If we go by your definition of justice, you need to give them their weapons back. And Thrasymachus says, well, no, and he's clearly insane, so this is... So, and this illustrates, of course, Elenchus, which is when Socrates is doing this in-depth questioning to his interlocutors about the various things that are going on. But regardless, the idea of justice is hard to get our hands around. So when we translate that into the classroom, I think it's important to realize that for justice, if we want justice, if we want equity in our classrooms, probably the best way to go about it and to think about it is to think of equity in terms of a destination that we're striving for, and the journey towards that destination is the truly valuable part of equity, because equity is a pretty high bar, and we may not be able to reach it, but if we strive for it in our classroom teaching, in the way we treat students, in the way we interact with students, in the way we try and do office hours and contact and interact with students and make the classroom learning more fun and interactive, all of that leads to this idea of equity, and we can't have equity without it. So think of equity as a goal, and the journey to the goal as what is valuable. Thank you.